The Knights of the Cross by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Your comment can help others discover this channel. Chapter 7. Talking thus, they went back toward the princess's retinue. Poala's servants followed them. From afar, one could see amidst the Mazovian caps the quivering peacock feathers of the Knight of the Cross and his bright helmet shining in the sun. Strange is the nature of a Krzyżak, said the Knight of Taczew. When a Krzyżak is in a tight place, he will be as forbearing as a Franciscan monk, as humble as a lamb, and as sweet as honey. In fact, it would be difficult to find a better man. But let him feel power behind him, then nobody will be more arrogant and merciless. It is evident that God gave them stones for hearts. I have seen many different nations, and I have often witnessed a true knight spare another who was weaker, saying to himself, "My fame will not increase if I trample this fallen foe." But at such a time a Krzyżak is implacable. Hold him by the throat, otherwise woe to you. Such a man is that envoy. He wanted not only an apology, but also your humiliation. But I am glad he failed. "He can wait," exclaimed Zbyszko. "Be careful not to show him that you are troubled, because then he would rejoice." After these words they approached the retinue and joined the princess' court. The envoy of the Krzyżaks, having noticed them, immediately assumed an expression of pride and disdain, but they ignored him. Zbyszko stood at Danusia's side and began to tell her that from the hill one could see Krakow. At the same time, Mako was telling one of the ribalts about the extraordinary strength of the Pan of Taczew, who had broken the spear in Zbyszko's hand, as though it were a dry stem. "And why did he break it?" asked the ribalt. "Because the boy in fun attacked the German." The ribalt, being a nobleman, did not consider such an attack a joke, but seeing that Mako spoke about it lightly, did not take it seriously either. The German was annoyed by such conduct. He glanced at Mako and Zbyszko. Finally he realized that they did not intend to dismount, and that they did not propose to pay any attention to him. Then something like steel shone in his eyes, and he immediately began to bid the princess adieu. The Lord of Taczew could not abstain from deriding him, and at the moment of departure he said to him, "Go without fear, brave knight. The country is quiet, and nobody will attack you, except some careless child." "Although the customs of this country are strange, I was seeking your company, and not your protection," answered Liechtenstein. "I expect to meet you again at the court, and elsewhere." In the last words, a hidden menace rang. Therefore Poala answered gravely, "If God will permit." Having said this, he saluted and turned away. Then he shrugged his shoulders and said in an undertone, but loud enough to be heard by those who were near, "Gaunt, I could lift you from the saddle with the point of my spear and hold you in the air during 3 paternosters." Then he began to talk with the princess with whom he was very well acquainted. Anna Danuta asked him what he was doing on the highway. He told her that the king had commanded him to keep order in the environs while there were so many wealthy guests going to Krakow. Then he told her about Zbyszko's foolish conduct. But having concluded that there would be plenty of time to ask the princess to protect Zbyszko, he did not put any stress on the incident, not wishing to spoil the gaiety. The princess laughed at the boy, because he was so anxious to obtain the peacock tuft. The others, having learned about the breaking of the spear, admired the Lord of Taczew very much, especially as he did it with one hand only. And he, being a little vain, was pleased because they praised him. Finally he began to tell about some of the exploits which made his name famous, especially those he performed in Burgundia, at the court of Philip the Courageous. There one time, during a tournament, he seized an Ardenian knight, pulled him out of the saddle, and threw him in the air, notwithstanding that the knight was in full armor. For that exploit, Philip the Courageous presented him with a gold chain, and the queen gave him a velvet slipper, which he wore on his helmet. Upon hearing this, all were very much amazed, except Mikolai of Dlugolas, who said, "In these effeminate times, there are not such strong men as there were when I was young. If a nobleman now happens to shatter a cuirass, to bend a crossbow without the aid of the crank, or to bend a cutlass between his fingers, he immediately considers himself a very strong man. But in times of yore, girls could do such deeds." "I don't deny that formerly there were stronger people," answered Poala, "but even now there are some strong men. God did not stint me in strength, but I do not consider myself the strongest in this kingdom. Have you ever seen Zawisza of Garbo? He can surpass me. I have seen him. He has shoulders broad like a rampart. And Dobko of Olesnica? Once at the tournament given in Torun by the Knights of the Cross, he defeated 12 knights for his own and our nation's glory. But our Mazur, Staszko Ciolek, was stronger, sir, than you or your Zawisza and Dobko. They say that he took a peg made from green wood in his hand and pressed the sap out of it. I can press the sap out myself, said Zbyszko, and before anyone could ask him to prove it, he broke a branch which he pressed so strongly that really the sap began to ooze from it. "Aye, Jesus!" exclaimed Ofka of Jarzomkow. "Don't go to the war. It would be a pity if such an one should perish before his marriage." "It would indeed be a pity," replied Mako, suddenly becoming sorrowful. But Mikolai of Dlugolas laughed, as did also the princess. The others, however, praised Zbyszko's strength, and as in those times might was appreciated more than any other quality, the young girls cried to Danusia, "Be glad!" She was glad, although she could not then understand what benefit she would receive from that piece of compressed wood. Zbyszko, having forgotten all about the Krzyżak, now looked so proud that Mikolai of Dlugolas, wishing to curb his pride, said, "There are better men than you, therefore do not be so proud of your strength. I did not see it, but my father was a witness of something more difficult, which happened at the court of Charles, the Roman emperor. King Kazimierz went to pay him a visit, and with him went many courtiers. Among these courtiers was Staszko Ciolek, son of Vojevoda Andrzej, who was noted for his strength. The emperor began to boast that he had a Czech who could strangle a bear. They had an exhibition, and the Czech strangled 2 bears in succession. Our king, not wishing to be outdone, said, 'But he cannot overcome my Ciolek.' They agreed that they should fight in 3 days' time. Many ladies and famous knights came, and the Czech and Ciolek grappled in the yard of the castle. But the contest did not last long. Hardly had they come together before Ciolek broke the backbone of the Czech, crushed all his ribs, and left him dead to the great glory of the king. They have called him since then Lomaniat. Once he placed without help a bell which 12 men could not move from its place." "How old was he?" asked Zbyszko. "He was young." In the meantime, Pawala of Taczew, while riding at the princess' right hand, bent toward her and told her the truth about the importance of Zbyszko's adventure, and asked her to speak to the king in Zbyszko's behalf. The princess, being fond of Zbyszko, received this news with sadness and became very uneasy. "The Bishop of Krakow is a friend of mine," said Pawala. "I will ask him and also the queen to intercede, but the more protectors he has, the better it will be for the lad. If the queen will promise to say one word in his favor, not a hair will fall from his head," said Anna Danuta. "The king worships her for her piety and for her dowry, and especially now, when the shame of sterility has been taken from her. But the king's beloved sister, Princess Zimowit, lives in Krakow. You must go to her. For my part, I will do anything I can, but the princess is his own sister, and I am only his first cousin. The king loves you also, gracious lady." "Ejay, but not as much," she answered with a certain sadness. "For me a link, for her a whole chain. For me a fox skin, for her a sable. He loves none of his relations as dearly as he loves Alexandra." Thus talking, they approached Krakow. The highway, which was crowded on the road from Tynecz, was still more crowded here. They met countrymen going with their servants to the city, sometimes armed and sometimes in summer clothing and straw hats. Some of them were on horseback. Some traveled in carriages, with their wives and daughters, who wished to see the long-looked-for tournaments. In some places the whole road was crowded with merchants' wagons, which could not pass Krakow until the toll was paid. They carried in these wagons wax, grain, salt, fish, skins, hemp, and wood. Others came from the city loaded with cloth, barrels of beer, and different merchandise. One could now see Krakow very well. The king's gardens, lords' and burghers' houses surrounded the city. Beyond them were the walls and the towers of the churches. The nearer they came to the city, the greater was the traffic, and at the gates it was almost impossible to pass. "What a city! There is no other like it in the world," said Mako. "It is always like a fair," answered one of the Rybalts. "How long since you were here, sir?" "A very long time ago. I wonder at it just as much as if I saw it now for the first time, because we are returning from a wild country. They say that Krakow has grown very much since the time of King Jagiełło. This was true. After the Grand Duke of Litwa ascended the throne, enormous Lithuanian and Russian countries were opened for commerce. Because of this, the city had increased in population, richness in buildings, and had become one of the most important cities in the world. The cities of the Knights of the Cross are very beautiful also, said the larger Rybalt. If only we could capture one of them, said Mako. Worthy booty we could get. But Pawala of Tachev was thinking about something else, namely of Zbyszko, who was in peril because of his stupid blind fury. The Pan of Tachev, fierce and implacable in the time of war, had in his powerful breast, however, the heart of a dove. He realized better than the others what punishment awaited the offender. Therefore he pitied him. I ponder and ponder, said he again to the princess, whether to tell the king of the incident or not. If the Krzyżak does not complain, there will be no case. But if he should complain, perhaps it would be better to tell the king everything beforehand, so that he will not become angry. If the Krzyżak has an opportunity to ruin somebody, he will do it, answered the princess. But I will tell that young man to join our court. Perhaps the king will be more lenient to one of our courtiers. She called Zbyszko, who, having had his position explained to him, jumped from his horse, kissed her hands, and became with the greatest pleasure one of her courtiers, not so much for greater safety as because he could now remain nearer Danusia. Pawala asked Mako, "Where will you stay?" "In an inn. There is no room in any inn now." "Then we will go to Merchant Amalej. He is an acquaintance of mine. Perhaps he will let us pass the night in his house." "Accept hospitality in my house. Your nephew can stay with the princess's courtiers in the castle, but it will be better for him not to be near the king. What one does in the first paroxysm of anger, one would not do afterward. You will be more comfortable and safe with me." Mako had become uneasy because Pawala thought so much about their safety. He thanked Pawala with gratitude, and they entered the city. But here they both, as well as Zbyszko, forgot for a while about danger in the presence of the wonders they saw before them. In Lithuania, and on the frontier, they had only seen single castles, and the only city of any importance which they knew was Wilno, a badly built and ruined town. But here, many of the merchants' houses were more magnificent than the Grand Duke's palace in Lithuania. It is true that there were many wooden houses, but even these astonished them by the loftiness of their walls and roofs, also by the windows, made of glass balls, set in lead, which so reflected the rays of the setting sun that one would imagine that there was fire in the houses. In the streets near the marketplace, there were many highly ornamented houses of red brick or of stone. They stood side by side like soldiers, some of them broad, others narrow, but all lofty with vaulted halls, very often having the sign of the Passion of our Lord Jesus Christ or an image of the Most Holy Virgin over the door. There were some streets on which one could see 2 rows of houses, over them a stripe of blue sky, between them a road paved with stones, and on both sides, as far as one could see, stores and stores. These were full of the best foreign goods, at which, being accustomed to war and the capture of booty, Mako looked with a longing eye. But both were still more astonished at the sight of the public buildings. The church of Panna Maria on the square, the Sukienets, the city hall with its gigantic cellar, in which they were selling beer from Swidnica, other churches, depots of broadcloth, the enormous mercatorium devoted to the use of foreign merchants, then a building in which were the public scales, bathhouses, cooperworks, waxworks, silverworks, goldworks, breweries, the mountains of barrels round the so-called Shrotamto. In a word, riches which a man not familiar with the city, even though a well-to-do possessor of a grodek, could not even imagine. Pawala conducted Mako and Zbyszko to his house situated on St. Anna Street, assigned a large room to them, recommended them to his shield-bearers, and then went to the castle, from which he returned for supper quite late at night. A few friends accompanied him, and they enjoyed the plentiful repast of wine and meat. The host alone was sorrowful. When finally the guests departed, he said to Mako, "I spoke to a canon, able in writing and in the law, who says that an insult to an envoy is a capital offense. Therefore pray God that the Krzyżacy may not complain." Hearing this, both knights, who during the feast had exceeded the other guests in mirth, retired with sorrowful hearts. Mako could not even sleep, and after a while, when they were in bed, he said to his nephew, "Zbyszku, what? I have considered everything, and I do not think they will execute you." "You do not think so?" asked Zbyszko in a sleepy voice. Having turned toward the wall, he fell sound asleep because he was very weary. The next day, both Zbyszko of Bogdaniec went with Pawala to morning mass in the cathedral for devotion and also to see the court and the guests who had arrived at the castle. In fact, on the way Pawala met many acquaintances, and among them several knights famous at home and abroad. At these Zbyszko looked with admiration, promising himself that if he escaped death for the insult to Liechtenstein, he would try to rival them in gallantry and in all knightly virtues. One of these knights, Toporczyk, a relative of the Castellan of Krakow, told them that Wojciech Jastrzębiec had returned from Rome, where he had been sent to Pope Bonifacius IX, with the king's invitation to the christening at Krakow. Bonifacius accepted the invitation, and although it was doubtful whether he would be able to come personally, he authorized the envoy to stand godfather for the coming child in his name, and he asked that the name Bonifacius or Bonifacia be given to the child as a proof of his particular love for the king and the queen. They also spoke of the arrival of the Hungarian king, Sigismundus. They expected him positively, because he always came, invited or not, whenever there was an opportunity for feasts and tournaments. Of these he was very fond, because he desired to be famous the world over as a ruler, a singer, and the first among knights. Pawala, Zawisa of Garbo, Dobko of Olesnica, Nashon, and others of the same rank, recollected with a smile that during Sigismundus' first visit, King Ladislaw requested them privately not to attack him very fiercely, but to spare the Hungarian guest, whose vanity, known throughout the world, used to make him cry in case of defeat. But the most interest was excited among the knights by Witold's affairs. They told marvelous tales about the magnificence of that cradle, made of sterling silver, which the Lithuanian princes and boyars had brought as a present from Witold and his wife Anna. Mako told about the proposed enormous expedition against the Tartars. The expedition was almost ready, and a great army had already gone eastward toward Rus. If it were successful, it would extend the king's supremacy over almost half the world, to the unknown Asiatic countries, to the frontier of Persia, and to the shores of the Aral. Mako, who formerly served under Witold and knew his plans, could tell about them so accurately and even so eloquently that before the bells were rung for Mass, a large circle of curious people had formed around him. He said that the question was simply about a crusade. Witold himself, he said, although they call him a Grand Duke, rules over Litwa by Jagiełło's authority. He is only viceroy, therefore the renown will be the king's. What fame it will be for the newly baptized Lithuanians and for the might of Poland when the united armies carry the cross to those countries where, if they mention the Saviour's name at all, it is only to blaspheme. When the Polish and Lithuanian armies restore Toktamish to the throne of Kapchak, he will acknowledge himself the son of King Ladislaw, and he has promised to bow to the cross with the whole Złota Orda. The people listened to Mako with great attention, but many did not thoroughly understand what people Witold intended to help, nor against whom he intended to fight. Therefore someone asked, "Tell exactly with whom is the war to be?" "With whom? With Timur the Lame," replied Mako. There was a moment of silence. It is true the Eastern Knights often heard the names of Golden, of Blue, of Azovian, and of other ords, but they were not familiar with the civil wars of the Tartars. Nevertheless, there was not one man in Europe who had not heard about the terrible Timur the Lame, or Tamerlan. This name was heard with no less fear than of old was the name of Attila. He was Lord of the world and Lord of ages, the ruler over 27 conquered states, the ruler of Moscowskoy Russia, ruler of Siberia and of China as far as the Indies, of Baghdad, of Ispahan, of Aleppo, of Damascus, whose shadow was falling over the sands of Arabia, on Egypt, and on Bosphorus in the Greek Empire. He was the exterminator of mankind, the terrible builder of pyramids composed of human skulls. He was the conqueror in all battles, never conquered in any, lord of souls and of bodies. Toktamish had been placed by him on the throne of the Golden and the Blue Ords, and acknowledged as the Sun. But when his sovereign authority extended from Aral to Crimea, over more lands than were in the rest of Europe, the Sun wanted to be an independent ruler. For this he was deposed from his throne with one finger of the terrible father. He escaped to the Lithuanian governor and asked him for help. Witold decided to restore him to his throne, but to do this it was necessary to vie with the world-ruling Timur the Lame. For these reasons his name made a great impression on the audience, and after a short silence, one of the oldest knights, Zbyszko of Jagiełło, said, "A difficult business." "And for a trifle," said the prudent Mikolai of Lugolis. "What difference will it make to us, whether Toktamish or some Kutluk rules over the sons of Belial who dwell beyond the 10th land?" "Toktamish will turn to the Christian faith," answered Mako. "He will or he will not. Can you trust dog brothers who do not confess Christ?" "But we are ready to lay down our lives for Christ's name," answered Pawala. "And for knightly honor," added Toporczyk, the relative of the Castellan. "There are some among us, however, who will not go. The Lord Wojewoda, Zbyszko of Melsztyn, has a young and beloved wife, but he has already joined Kniaz Witold." "No wonder," added Jasko Nasen. "No matter how hideous a sin you have on your soul, pardon and salvation are sure for those who fight in such a war." "And fame for ages and ages," said Pawala of Tachef. "Let us then have a war, and it will be better if it be a great war. Timur has conquered the world and has 27 states under him. It will be an honor for our nation if we defeat him." "Why not?" answered Toporczyk. "Even if he possesses 100 kingdoms, let others be afraid of him, not us. You speak wisely. Let us gather together 10,000 good spearmen, and we will pass round the world. And what nation should conquer the lame, if not ours?" Thus the knights conversed. Zbyszko was sorry now because he did not go with Witold to the wild steppes. But when he was in Wilno, he wanted to see Krakow and its court and take part in the tournaments. But now he fears that he will find disgrace here at the court, while there on the steppes, even at the worst, he would have found a glorious death. But the aged Zbyszko of Jagiełło, who was 100 years old, and whose common sense corresponded to his age, discouraged the zealous knights. "You are stupid," said he. "Is it possible that none of you have beard that Christ's image spoke to the Queen? If the Savior himself condescend to such familiarity, then why will the Holy Ghost, who is the third person of the Trinity, be less kind to her? Therefore she sees future events as if they were passing before her, and she has thus spoken." Here he stopped for a while, shook his head, and then said, "I have forgotten what she prophesied, but I will soon recollect." He began to think, and they waited silently, because the popular belief was that the Queen could see the future. "Aha!" said he, finally. "I remember now. The Queen said that if every knight went with Witold against the lame man, then heathenish power would be destroyed. But all cannot go because of the dishonesty of Christian lords. We are obliged to guard the boundaries from the attacks of the Czechs and the Hungarians, and also from the attacks of the Order, because we cannot trust any of them. Therefore, if Witold go with only a handful of Polish warriors, then Timur the Lame, or his Wojewodas, coming with innumerable hosts, will defeat him." "But we are at peace now," said Toporczyk, "and the Order will give some assistance to Witold. The Knights of the Cross cannot act otherwise, if only for the sake of appearances, and to show to the Holy Father that they are ready to fight the pagans. The courtiers say that Kuno von Liechtenstein came not entirely for the christening, but also to consult with the king." "Here he is!" exclaimed the astonished Mako. "True," said Pawala, turning his head. "So help me God, it is he! He did not stay long with the abbot." "He is in a hurry," answered Mako gloomily. Kuno von Liechtenstein passed them. Mako and Zbyszko recognized him by the cross embroidered on his mantle, but he did not recognize either of them because he had seen them before with their helmets on. Passing by, he nodded to Pawala of Tachef and to Toporczyk. Then with his shield-bearers he ascended the stairs of the cathedral in a majestic and stately manner. At that moment the bells resounded, frightening flocks of doves and jackdaws, and announcing that Mass would soon begin. Mako and Zbyszko entered the church with the others, feeling troubled about Liechtenstein's quick return. The older Lodika was very uneasy. But the young one's attention was attracted by the king's court. He was surrounded by noted men, famous in war and in council. Many of those by whose wisdom the marriage of the Grand Duke of Lithuania with the young and beautiful Queen of Poland had been planned and accomplished were now dead, but a few of them were still living, and at these all looked with the greatest respect. The young knight could not admire enough the magnificent figure of Zbyszko of Tencin, Castellan of Krakow, in which sternness was united with dignity and honesty. He admired the wise countenances of the councillors and the powerful faces of the knights, whose hair was cut evenly on their foreheads and fell in long curls on their sides and backs. Some of them wore nets, others wore bands to keep the hair in order. The foreign guests, Hungarian and Austrian, and their attendants, were amazed at the great elegance of the costumes. The Lithuanian princes and boyars, notwithstanding the summer heat, were dressed for the sake of pompous display in costly furs. The Russian princes wore large, stiff dresses, and in the background they looked like Byzantine pictures. With the greatest curiosity, Zbyszko awaited the appearance of the king and the queen. He advanced toward the stalls behind which he could see the red velvet cushions near the altar, on which the king and the queen kneeled during Mass. He did not wait long. The king entered first through the vestry door, and before he reached the altar, one could have a good look at him. He had long, dark, disheveled hair. His face was thin and clean-shaven. He had a large pointed nose and some wrinkles around his mouth. His eyes were small, dark, and shining. His face had a kind but cautious look, like that of a man who, having risen by good luck to a position far beyond his expectations, is obliged to think continually whether his actions correspond to his dignity, and who is afraid of malicious criticism. This also was the reason why in his face and in his movements there was a certain impatience. It was very easy to understand that his anger would be sudden and dreadful. He was that prince who, being angered at the frauds of the Knights of the Cross, shouted after their envoy, "Thou comest to me with a parchment, but I will come to thee with a spear." But now this natural vehemence was restrained by great and sincere piety. He set a good example, not only to the recently converted Lithuanian princes, but even to the Polish lords, pious for generations. Often the king kneeled, for the greater mortification of the flesh, on bare stones. Often, having raised his hands, he held them uplifted until they dropped with fatigue. He attended at least 3 masses every day. After Mass he left the church as if just awakened from slumber, soothed and gentle. The courtiers knew that it was the best time to ask him either for pardon or for a gift. Jadwiga entered through the vestry door also. Seeing her enter, the knights standing near the stalls immediately kneeled, although Mass had not begun, voluntarily paying her homage as to a saint. Zbyszko did the same. Nobody in this assembly doubted that he really saw a saint, whose image would sometime adorn the church altars. Besides the respect due to a queen, they almost worshipped her on account of her religious and holy life. It was reported that the queen could perform miracles. They said that she could cure the sick by touching them with her hand, that people who could not move their legs nor their arms were able to do it after they put on a dress which the queen had worn. Trustworthy witnesses affirmed that they had heard with their own ears Christ speak to her from the altar. Foreign monarchs worshipped her on their knees, and even the order of the Knights of the Cross respected her and feared to offend her. Pope Bonifacius IX called her the pious and chosen daughter of the Church. The world looked at her deeds and remembered that this child of the Andegavian house and Polish Piasts, this daughter of the powerful Louis, a pupil of the most fastidious of courts, and also one of the most beautiful women on earth, renounced happiness, renounced her first love, and being a queen, married a wild prince of Lithuania in order to bring to the cross, by his help, the last pagan nation in Europe. That which could not be accomplished by the forces of all the Germans, by a sea of poured-out blood, was done with one word from her. Never did the glory of an apostle shine over a younger and more charming forehead. Never was the apostleship united with equal self-denial. Never was the beauty of a woman lighted with such angelic kindness and such quiet sadness. Therefore minstrels sang about her in all the European courts. Knights from the remotest countries came to Krakow to see this Queen of Poland. her own people loved her, as the pupil of the eye, and their power and glory had increased by her marriage with Jagiełło. Only one great sorrow hung over her and the nation. For long years this child of God had had no issue. But now this sorrow had passed away, and the joyful news of God's blessing on the Queen sped like lightning from the Baltic to the Black Sea, also to Carpathy, and filled with joy all peoples of this powerful kingdom. In all foreign courts, except in the capital of the Knights of the Cross, the news was received with pleasure. In Rome, Te Deum was sung. In the provinces of Poland, the belief was firmly established that anything the Saint Lady asked of God would be granted. Therefore there came to her people to beseech her that she ask health for them. There came envoys from the provinces and from other countries to ask that she pray according to their need, either for rain or for fair weather for harvesting, for lucky moving time, for abundant fishing in the lakes, or for game in the forests. Those knights, living in castles and grotix on the frontier, who according to the custom learned from the Germans, had become robbers or waged war among themselves, at the command of the Queen, put their swords in their scabbards, released their prisoners without ransom, restored stolen herds, and clasped hands in friendship. All kinds of misery, all kinds of poverty crowded the gates of her castle in Krakow. Her pure spirit penetrated human hearts, softened the hard lot of the serfs, the great pride of the lords, the unjust severity of the judges, and hovered like a dove of happiness, like an angel of justice and peace, over the whole country. No wonder, then, that all were awaiting with anxious hearts for the day of blessing. The knights looked closely at the figure of the Queen, to see if they could ascertain how long they would be obliged to wait for the future heir to the throne. The Ksiądz Bishop of Krakow, Wish, who was also the ablest physician in the country, and famous even abroad, had not announced when the delivery would occur. They were making some preparation, but it was the custom at that time to begin all festivals as early as possible, and to prolong them for weeks. In fact, the figure of the lady, although a little rounded, had retained until now its former grandeur. She was dressed with excessive simplicity. Formerly, having been brought up at a brilliant court and being more beautiful than any of the contemporary princesses, she was fond of costly fabrics, of chains, pearls, gold bracelets, and rings. But now, and even for several years past, she not only wore the dress of a nun, but she even covered her face, fearing that the thoughts of her beauty might arouse in her worldly vanity. In vain Jagiełło, having learned of her condition, in a rapture of joy ordered her sleeping apartment to be decorated with brocade and jewels. Having renounced all luxury, and remembering that the time of confinement is often the time of death, she decided that not among jewels, but in quiet humility she ought to receive the blessing which God had promised to send her. Meanwhile, the gold and jewels went to establish a college and to send the newly converted Lithuanian youths to foreign universities. The Queen agreed only to change her monastical dress, and from the time that the hope of maternity was changed to positive certainty, she did not veil her face, thinking that the dress of a penitent was no longer proper. Consequently, everybody was now looking with love at that beautiful face, to which neither gold nor precious stones could add any charm. The Queen walked slowly from the vestry door toward the altar, with uplifted eyes, holding in one hand a book, in the other a rosary. Zbyszko saw the lily-like face, the blue eyes, and the angelic features full of peace, kindness, and mercy, and his heart began to throb with emotion. He knew that according to God's command he ought to love the king and the queen, and he did in his way. But now his heart overflowed with a great love, which did not come by command but burst forth like a flame. His heart was also filled with the greatest worship, humility, and desire for sacrifice. The young Lodika Zbyszko was impetuous. Therefore a desire immediately seized him to show in some way that love and the faithfulness of a knight, to accomplish some deed for her, to rush somewhere, to conquer someone, and to risk his own life for it all. "I had better go with Kniaz Witold," he said to himself, "because how can I serve the Holy Lady if there is no war here?" He did not stop to think that one can serve in other ways as well as with sword or spear or axe. He was ready to attack alone the whole power of Timur the Lame. He wanted to jump on his charger immediately after Mass and begin something. What? He did not know himself. He only knew that he could not hold anything, that his hands were burning and his whole soul was on fire. He forgot all about the danger which threatened him. He even forgot about Danusia, and when he remembered her, having heard the children singing in the church, he felt that this love was something different. He had promised Danusia fidelity. He had promised her 3 Germans, and he would keep his promise. But the queen is above all women. While he was thinking how many people he would like to kill for the queen, he perceived regiments of armors, helmets, ostrich feathers, peacocks' crests, and he felt that even that would be small in proportion to his desire. He looked at her constantly, pondering with overflowing heart how he could honor her by prayer, because he thought that one could not make an ordinary prayer for a queen. He could say, Pater Noster, qui es in coelis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, because a certain Franciscan monk taught him this in Wilno, but it may be that the Franciscan himself did not know more. It may be that Zbyszko had forgotten, but it is certain that he could not recite the whole Our Father. But now he began to repeat these few words which in his soul had the following meaning: Give our beloved lady good health, long life, and great happiness. Care for her more than for anyone else. As this was repeated by a man over whose head punishment was suspended, therefore there was no more sincere prayer in the whole church.
Remember to subscribe.